To understand one of the darkest novels ever written, we have to travel back to 1860s Russia. This photograph shows Nikolai Chernyshevsky, a radical thinker who captivated the Russian intelligentsia with a theory called rational egoism. Rational egoism argued that human beings are entirely logical creatures. The theory claimed that if we are properly educated by science, we will naturally make choices that maximize our own best interests. It treated human behavior like a solvable math equation, cleanly resolving to a simple, undeniable truth: 2 times 2 equals 4. And this image shows the physical symbol of that logic, a stereoscopic view of the Crystal Palace in London. For thinkers like Chernyshevsky, this massive structure of iron and glass represented what a mathematically harmonious society could look like: a perfectly engineered utopia, totally free of suffering. But achieving that pristine utopia required a terrifying trade-off. If society is organized by strict scientific logic, every individual action must be predictable. Humans would no longer be free, independent agents. They would become easily calculated inputs in a giant, inescapable machine. Fyodor Dostoevsky, pictured here, despised this vision. In 1864, he fired back with a novella told from the perspective of an unnamed 40-year-old narrator living in a squalid St. Petersburg basement. The underground man looks at the shiny promises of the rational egoists and aggressively rejects them. He argues that humans are not piano keys waiting to be played by the laws of nature. If you try to force humanity into a perfectly engineered sequence, we will actively rebel and break the rhythm just to prove we are still alive. According to the underground man, our most advantageous advantage is absolute free will. And to protect that freedom, a person will deliberately choose chaos, suffering, and total irrationality over a dictated, scientifically optimized happiness. On paper, this defense of irrational rebellion sounds heroic. It feels like a defense of the human soul against cold mathematics. But Dostoevsky poses a brutal question. What actually happens to a person who tries to live by this theory in reality? This is the structural trap of the book. Dostoevsky spends the first half seducing you into agreeing with this grand defense of freedom. Then he abruptly pulls the rug out to reveal the pathetic reality of the man who preaches it. The narrative shifts 16 years into the past to test this philosophy on the streets. The young underground man suffers from what he calls hyper-consciousness, an intense, obsessive overanalysis of every motive and thought. While normal men of action confidently navigate the world, he is frozen in place. His paralysis is put to the test in a tavern when a confident military officer needs to walk past him. Instead of asking him to move, the officer simply picks the underground man up by the shoulders and casually moves him aside, not even registering him as a human being. A man of action would react immediately. Our narrator retreats to his room to overanalyze the slight. He spends months plotting an incredibly petty revenge, borrowing money to buy nice clothes so he can pass the officer on the street and deliberately bump shoulders, a gesture the officer barely even notices. His celebrated hyperconsciousness is a paralyzing disease. His absolute free will, which he claimed was the ultimate human advantage, has actually trapped him in an endless loop of cowardice and inaction. This inability to engage with the world breeds a psychological poison known as resentment, a lingering internalized spite where powerless people obsess over the strong. We see this erupt when the narrator invites himself to a farewell dinner for a popular, successful former classmate named Sperkov. Desperate to prove his fierce individuality to the group, his behavior twists into toxicity. He gets completely drunk, mocks his former friends, and hurls aggressive insults to force them to acknowledge his superiority. Instead of fighting him, they simply write him off. The night ends with a pathetic display. His former friends continue their conversation, while he spends 3 solid hours silently pacing back and forth across the room, waiting for someone to pay attention to him. He wanted to assert his fierce independence, but the rebellion didn't liberate him. It only resulted in a humiliating, self-inflicted isolation from everyone around him. Fleeing the dinner party in absolute disgrace, he seeks out someone he can finally dominate. In a local brothel, he finds Lisa, a young prostitute. To regain his sense of power, he delivers a terrifying, theatrical speech, vividly detailing the miserable death that awaits her in her profession. The speech works, and she breaks down in tears. But a few days later, Liza visits his squalid apartment. She sees past his intellectual arrogance, recognizes how deeply broken he is, and offers him genuine empathy and love. This is the ultimate test of his philosophy, and he fails it. His worldview is so poisoned by power dynamics and spite that he views her compassion as an attack. He is psychologically incapable of accepting vulnerability. In a final act of cruelty, he sleeps with her and then presses money into her hand. He intentionally degrades her back to the status of a prostitute, driving her out of his apartment and out of his life forever. This is the final toll of his philosophy. By chasing absolute self-will to its logical end, the narrator destroys his capacity for connection, sealing himself forever into a tragedy of his own making. Returning to the present day, the 40-year-old narrator sits alone in his basement. He has technically won his argument. He successfully asserted his free will against the logic of society, but his prize is a bitter, isolated existence. Yet this miserable confession established the foundation for modern existentialism. Dostoevsky successfully proved that human nature is too volatile to ever be solved by a mathematical equation. This is the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Decades later, he read the novella and called Dostoevsky the only psychologist from whom he had anything to learn. The Underground Man perfectly modeled Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment, how weak, inactive individuals construct elaborate moral systems to justify their own failures. And here we see Jean-Paul Sartre. In the 20th century, he recognized the narrator's struggles as the perfect illustration of bad faith. The Underground Man constantly adopts false, literary roles to avoid the terrifying responsibility of taking real action in his own life. Through this story, Dostoevsky leaves us caught between two terrifying extremes. A perfectly rational, engineered society that treats humans like predictable cogs is a nightmare. But absolute, spiteful individualism without moral grounding is a personal hell. We live in an era increasingly dominated by algorithms, data, and the relentless optimization of human behavior. Notes from Underground remains a dark, urgent reminder that no matter how sophisticated our systems become, humanity remains incurably, dangerously irrational.